What is up, Internet? What is the one thing that you should be doing to protect the wealth in your family? We're going to be talking about that today and more on The Brian Hurst Show. What is up, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Hurst Show. Hope that this video finds you well, wherever you may be. And today we're going to be talking about something very important to protect the wealth in your family's estate. Last year, it was probably about this time last year, I had a client come to me, and both of his parents passed within the same calendar year. And the good news is that they had some assets that they left to him in their estate. The bad news is that the real property, the house that they left to him, was not in a trust. They didn't have a trust set up. It was just held in their name as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. And so he had to go through the painstaking process to sell the property through probate. So here's the thing. Once we finally got under contract, and it took about 4 months to market the property and get it under contract, not because the house was not marketable, but because of the difficulty with being able to deliver what we call equitable title. Most real estate transactions take about 30 days. This transaction took 120 days to go through the probate process. Fortunately, the buyer was willing to hang in with us and close the deal. But the worst part of it is even post-closing, it took an additional 6 months for the disbursement to be made complete to him so that he got the proceeds of his sale. And so as a result, this issue of holding your assets in a trust has become so incredibly important. And so today I've asked one of my dear friends and one of the very best and most knowledgeable professionals in our industry, Mr. Bobby Tarango from Chicago Title, to join us on the show. What is up, Bobby T?
Yeah, wow, so I'm gonna be here on the B Hurst Show. I'm on
The B Hurst Show. Hey, listen, the reason we do this show in part is because of you.
Oh.
Yeah, because you've been on my case for a long time now about you need to put yourself out there. You need to make videos. You need to get the content. Well, here's the content.
There it is, baby.
And you are helping provide some of that content.
Well, excellent. Honored to be here.
Awesome. Bobby, tell us a little bit about yourself. You, like last week's guest, Samantha, you're an OG, right? You grew up here in the high desert?
Yeah, I grew up in the high desert. I think we moved up here when I was 5, and gosh, I lived here ever since. I think there was a short stint where we moved to Vegas for like 2 years, and then we came back. That's what it is when you join the desert, man.
Awesome. You can never leave. How long have you been in the title business?
Over 30 years now.
Over 30 years. You only look like you're 30.
Exactly. We're about the same age, man. 29.
So you were just a kid then?
Yeah, I was 18, right out of high school. I didn't even know what title was. I just, I knew I could drive a car and deliver things at the time.
So before we talk about trust, Bobby, maybe tell us, this is a nice little segue, what exactly is title and what exactly is title insurance?
You know what? Yeah, that's, nobody knows they have title insurance. I tell everybody, if you have a loan on your property, there's a 99% probability that you have title insurance on your property. And for those that probably see those little commercials on television, like it's called like Title Lock. Hey, protect your assets from fraud, from title fraud. That's pretty much what we do. So, for instance, when you buy a piece of property, excuse me, you want to make sure the person you're buying it from can actually sell you that property. We're not like your traditional insurance where we're sure about things that are going to happen in the future. We're insuring things against things that may have happened in the past.
Mm,
So when you buy a piece of property and we put a title report together, we're making sure when the United States deeded out the property in their first land patent, and they deeded it to Mr. Johnson, and then they deeded it to Abel, then they deeded it to Smith. We're making sure all those transactions were handled properly. We're showing you all the easements, anybody that had any right of ways across that property. We're showing you if there's any sort of liens on that property. So when you take title to that property, you do it with eyes wide open. So that's where title insurance kind of falls. If somebody comes along later on and says, hey, you know what, I have a loan against this property, what happened, how come I didn't get paid off? That's where we go and protect. There's some things where we protect after the fact now, but I don't want to get too far into the weeds. But just in a nutshell, that's what title insurance is. We are insuring the past.
and so, yeah, the term in our business is chain or abstract of title,
Yes.
and it's the succession of people who held title to that property. And it's interesting that you went back all the way back to when the government first deeded the property to somebody. That's fascinating.
I actually
And
have a deed for when Wyatt, well, not Wyatt Earp, but Virgil Earp, from the OK Corral, Wyatt Earp, Virgil Earp in the late 1800s deeded to his wife. So I actually have a copy of that deed. And somebody was actually ironically last week found a deed inside the wall of their house that they thought, hey, somebody might need this, and it was interesting. It's from 1927 in Cook County, Chicago. That's actually where title insurance was born, right there. So I'm gonna
what
get this
is
all
that?
framed.
Is that the genesis of the name Chicago title?
Yes, basically, yeah, it's a fascinating story on that. I mean, because we're a 175-year-old company. What happened was, there was always abstract companies that would go do title searches, but what happened? There was the Great Fire there in Chicago, which burnt all the property records out. Even the county assessors, whatever they had, all their property information was gone. But there were several of our branches that had all these documents and they kept it. There was a story where they went to the lake and buried them in the sand just to make sure they weren't going to get destroyed. And there was another story where there was a guy, one of our folks, he was there in the office and grabbing all of his all the records. He was grabbing all the records and running out. And he actually stopped a guy in a horse carriage by gunpoint and said, "I need you to help me get all these records loaded,
Wow.
so we don't lose it." So that's how committed to title we are, man. That's I haven't pulled a gun on anybody yet, but I'm not opposed to it. No.
Fascinating. And what we're talking about today with trust is how somebody would hold title to their assets. Tell us a little bit about what a trust is.
For lack of a better term, a lot of people will say, it's like a will. I mean, in terms of people can understand. And when you put a will together, you're saying, little Johnny's going to get this, Sarah's going to get this, my wife's going to get this in the will. So when it comes to real property, real estate, uh, the best thing to do is a trust, because the trust states exactly what's to happen when you pass. So my wife and I, we're the trustees of our trust. Let's just say it's a Bobby and Stacy Tarango trust, dated whatever date it could be at that particular moment. But in that trust, it states what's to happen when we pass or we become incapacitated as to what's to happen.
Okay. And so the value in setting up a trust and then transferring the title of your real property from, your personal entity or name
Mhm.
into a trust would be what?
Well, you know what? A lot of times, because I'll tell you the biggest some of the biggest issues we have in our industry, again, are folks doing stuff on their own or not doing stuff at all. Um, just last week, I just had somebody call me. As a matter of fact, Saturday, somebody called me and said, "Hey, I have a client. This came in. Her she deeded off the property. She did an interspousal deed, and so her husband was the only one entitled, and he passed away. So now she wants to sell this piece of property, and I got to tell her, unfortunately, you got to go through probate. And for those that have never been through probate before, that could be an arduous, a whole, if it could be a whole arduous process, especially if you got people contesting who should have title to the property. So what probate is basically the courts have to decide who's going to get title to, who's going to get these assets, who's going to get title to this property. Now, if in some cases, if you got siblings, that's a battle. That is a
Mm.
total battle. And then in another case, where the case we had where there was probably no other heirs, you got a grieving spouse who's not only grieving, they have to deal with this complicated deal. They got to go get an attorney, and the attorney is going to tell them, okay, well, if you really got to sell it, maybe we can get an emergency court order to get it. We could get it sold within 4 months, but you're not going to see that those assets, that money. You're not going to see that for at least 8 to 15 months, and that's a worst case scenario. And that's again if you don't have anybody fighting over it, because sometimes it could be a second marriage, and you can have some kids start popping up. When somebody passes away, that's when people start popping up. That's the value of this trust. This trust states exactly what's to happen when things go down. Because a lot of times people will say, "Hey, we got this will." Unfortunately, we don't accept wills. That'll be good. You can give it to the probate court, and they can accept. They might take that in consideration as to who's to get what. But when it comes to real property, the only thing we accept are those trusts.
So let's say somebody has $150,000 in equity in their property.
Mm-hmm.
And typically it's going to cost the seller somewhere around 7% or so of the value of the property to sell the property. So it's a $500,000 house. It's going to cost you, give or take, somewhere around $35,000 to sell it.
Okay.
That's your title and escrow and broker fees and all the stuff that goes along with it.
Sure.
And so of the 150,000, you've now got 115,000 left over in the estate that would be in the inheritance, whoever has been left with the property.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have to go through probate, it's going to take you, I heard you say, up to 15 months before you see any of that money after you sell it.
Yes.
That's number one.
And
Number
here's the other
two,
thing. If the probate, that's it. There's nobody contested. That's just like getting your funds. The probate could take longer if you got people fighting.
right. So, well, and then the second, and you said the whole issue about title insurance is we need to make sure that whoever it is that's selling the property is able to deliver title to the property.
Correct.
And so if you're not on the title, so if it's your mom and dad that died and they left you real property and there's $150,000 there in your inheritance that you're entitled to, if you're not on the title, how are you going to sell it?
You bring up an interesting point right there, because a lot of times, just because we think it's obvious, mom and dad died. Well, who else is it going to go to? Unfortunately, the law does not work that way, man. We want stuff official and in writing when it comes to property.
Right. Well, because if you can't resolve it, and this may be something that's interesting for people to know, it'll ultimately end up in the hands of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And so $150,000 ending up in the hands of the state,
They're so good with our money anyways.
So the other component to that is you're going to have to hire a probate attorney.
Yes.
And that attorney is going to get a cut of that remaining $115,000, whatever the attorney's fees are.
Yeah, and usually those fees are statutory fees, so I don't think they're too astronomical. But you get time and money, which it could have all been avoided.
Right, and so how to avoid it is to
you gotta get it into that trust, get it into the trust.
What do you think holds most people back Because, well, I'll just ask you this question. You deal with a lot of transactions.
Yes.
How many how many orders do you think you deal with in a year?
Oh, in a year? Oh my God. I can tell you, I've done over 50,000 in my entire career. I calculated that.
Okay, well, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
How many? And this is anecdotal, of course,
Yeah.
from my own experience in real estate. Not very many people hold their real assets in trust. What percentage would you think that comes across your desk? How
Gosh,
many?
I'll bet you it's less than a percent. I'll bet you it's less than a percent.
Less than 1%?
Yeah, I bet you it's less than 1%. If I were
Why
to
do you
run
think?
all the records and just maybe just take any city at any given time, just maybe less than 1%.
It confounds me a little bit
Mhm.
because of what we've talked about. Um, I have a good friend just 1 week ago today. The initial reports were heart failure, but I guess it was a kidney issue
Oh,
that he went into the hospital, had some kind of a kidney problem failure, went into the hospital on the same day, passed.
oh,
We had his funeral on Friday.
mm,
Young man, in his mid 60s. We don't know what could possibly happen, whether it be an accident or a health issue or something where all of a sudden you're gone. And the thought to me of, I want to leave my children assets and wealth,
mhm.
right? So that's part of the value of home ownership.
That or at least want to take care of my loved ones.
Correct. So I want to leave behind my wife and my children. Right, that's part of what we're doing
Mhm.
with home ownership is we're building generational wealth. We talked about this last
Yes.
week with
Yeah.
Sam.
Generational
You
wealth
can't do
for
that
sure.
renting, right? You need to own property to generate to develop the generational wealth, and I wanna leave that behind to my kids, and if I instead leave behind a headache in trying to lay claim to those assets and to that wealth, I'm not doing them any favors. So the obvious solution to me is okay, well, I'm gonna develop a trust. I'm gonna get a trust and I'm gonna put all my assets in trust and I'm gonna instruct where the money's supposed to go if should anything happen.
Sure.
Why do you think people don't do this? If it's I mean, it's not why don't they do it?
You know what? I tend to think. I mean, me. As I'm growing up and I hear about a trust, I'm thinking, gosh, maybe this is just for wealthy people. But I didn't realize, now that I'm older and I understand some things, it's about, like you said, it's about building generational wealth. And I think it's a part of this thinking bigger beyond yourself. Hey, I got this property, but you're thinking about the next generation, of this property having. Maybe I'm building something here, but I think people think it's just for wealthy people, and it's not. It's not. It's very affordable to do this, and it's not very complicated, but it needs to be done because I was at a chamber meeting and I started off and said, hey, Chicago Title's done a lot of research. We talked to hundreds of doctors and hundreds of scientists, and we come to the conclusion 10 out of 10 of us are going to pass away, and your real
Yeah,
estate is going to
the
outlive
death
you.
rate's hovering right around 100%.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. You were definitely not taking it with you, so gotta have some plans for it. It's a sad state though. Again, when it happens, like every other week, I'll get somebody calling me. Hey, this, where the spouse has passed away and they deed it off for one reason or another, and they forget to put them back on, or they're just not sure they were supposed to. Because, again, most people that don't know title, and most people don't, and I don't expect everybody to understand title, but definitely, I'm glad you're doing this because I want the general public to start asking us and give us a call. I can't give you legal advice, but what I can tell you what's going to happen if you don't do A, B, or C, or if you do A, B, or C. And there's some ways you can do it without a trust. You can get around it, but The trust is the best possible thing to do. I've obviously I've had many clients for having a career over 30 years, and I've had some professionals that hadn't had their stuff in the trust, and I had to deal with their kids later on.
Wow.
Just having to deal
So
with
if
it.
somebody wanted to create a trust, they would do what?
Well, the first thing I got to call an attorney that does trust. I know there's several of them that are local here, and they're very affordable, and they just get the whole thing together. And here's one other key thing: it's not about getting that. Let's say you make the trust, and your property you have now is in that trust. The property you live in, you haven't put it in the trust. 10 years down the line, maybe you sold that property, maybe you acquired some other pieces of property, and you forget to deed them into the trust. That's another issue that
Mhm.
somebody's going to have to clean up, because if you don't deed, and it's not, you don't have to go back to the attorney and say, hey, will you put this in the trust? You don't have to do that. All you have to do is deed the new property, just deed it into the trust. Because if
Right.
you don't, somebody's still left with still left with dealing with a headache. Not a really big headache, but it's enough where you have to get an attorney involved, and like
Right.
they have to do like what they call a Hagstead Act. It's basically saying, going to the court and say, yeah, he meant to put this in the trust because he hadn't established one.
Well, again, we're trying to avoid those difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bobby, if somebody needed to call you, we got your information there on the screen. And then
Definitely.
you got your own YouTube channel there, the Mike and Bobby Show, and I think you guys put up weekly content too, right?
Yeah, well, Mike's working on a video right now talking about the market. I myself have been concentrating a lot on title stuff. I actually have a video where I talked about how to take title, and I did one that talked about trusts. Actually, I've been getting some calls on that one because people need to know, because this is that's a great thing about the internet and everything. The democratization of information. It's not just for the wealthy; it's for everybody. It's a trust is for everybody. You really should do it. If you think bigger, let's think about building generational wealth. I
Yeah, I mean,
really love that term.
how much do we think a trust is going to cost somebody?
You could be looking for, oh God, there was a guy that just retired that was doing it for like $400, but not anymore though. I think anybody locally, you're looking for about 1,000 to 1,500 bucks. But
Right.
just think about if you don't do it, what it's going to cost you.
Was it was the guy doing it for 400 Earl Scheib?
No, no, he was doing a great job. He guy was doing a ton of them, man, and finally he retired. They had
Gotcha.
enough, had enough.
All right, last question before we get you out of here, and thanks again for coming on today, Bobby. And we'll look forward to having you come on again and share some more things with us. But just real quick, your crystal ball, what's the market going to do this year?
The guys we listen to are the Chapman University guys, and I always tell people that those guys are like the number one forecasters in the United States. The guys that go listen to them, like when we go in person, are your KB, your Lennar, your Pulte, and then when that guy says, "Hey, your forecast is," though, you're 500 people in the room, and then you can hear a pin drop. He's calling for recession this year, but I think everybody's calling for something mild. One of the things that people need to keep in mind, and again, buyers and sellers, maybe we have a 2000 demand. And when people think about that, they think, oh my God, 2007 demand. But you have to remember, in 2007, we had 5,000 listings at one time. So that drove the market down fast. Um, Maybe we have the same demand, but we have around 1,200 listings right now. So we're less than what we need for an average to keep a balanced market, 15 to 2,000 listings right now. So that's something to really keep in mind when, if a buyer's sitting there on the fence waiting for the prices to drop, they're not dropping as fast. And if these interest rates drop a little bit, the party could start right again, and you'll be in the same boat. The seller's giving concessions now. They're giving them now. You can go on, and they're a little soft right now. But if the interest rates drop, so will the concessions. I mean, they might go tell you to pound sand. This is I'm going to want this. But it'll be a little difficult to see what the inventory is going to do. One of the things that we're telling people is that it's not just about them wanting maybe they want to move, but it's about them wanting to leave that loan they have. I just did a quick little study to figure out how many people had loan interest rate under 3%, under 4%, and under 5%. But it turns out, almost half of our housing population has an interest rate under 5%. I think you have a pretty good, like almost 17% have under 3%. So they got to be motivated to. So the people that are entering the market now, they're real sellers right now. They're real motivated.
Gotcha. Well, you're a wealth of knowledge, Bobby. So much of who I am today as an agent and broker is because of your influence on my life. Appreciate the
Thank you,
time
brother.
coming in today, and we'll do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the time.
Have an awesome day.
You too.
There he is, folks. Bobby Tarango. He and Mike are just an invaluable resource, not only to me personally, but to the real estate industry and to the public like you. So let's get to it. The weekly market update. Before we get there, be sure to like, share, and subscribe and smash the notification icon so that we can keep this channel going, keep it growing. Appreciate it. Okay, let's look at the market update. Bobby shared some numbers. His numbers are more encompassing than mine. These are only single-family residences. These are only in Victorville, Apple Valley, Hesperia, Adelanto, Phelan, and Oak Hills. The last 30 days, we had 232 homes sold. Again, our normal absorption rate, even at this time of year, would be more like 350 to 400. So we're down 40 to 50% and kind of our normal absorption rate, even for the slower time of year. 361 homes in escrow. So again, less than half of 2 months of supply in escrow, indicating a slower market. And actively listed for sale, Bobby mentioned 1,200. This is just in the 6 municipalities here. 961 SFRs listed for sale. So again, we're in the situation where we have low demand and low inventory, which keeps the pricing stable. Median sale price of those 232 homes sold $410,000. So everything's still bumping around that 400 grand. And I was not able to get an update on the interest rate in time for today's show. So this is 5.75 is last week's rate. And I'll be sure to try to get something for you next week. As always, just appreciate you watching this show. We hope to be able to do it and hope it is something of value to you. And hope that you have a great week. And in the meantime, man, go out there, do your very best, build generational wealth, and may God bless you. Talk to you soon.